You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik. Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. I'm Josh Mead, joined with my good friend Erik Johnson. It's been a while, which I guess that's the story of our life these days. Erik, we've been, sporadic with putting out episodes, but we do have a great lineup of ideas and conversations that we want to have, not only with each other, but conversations and interviews we want to conduct with some other pastors and missionaries. It's just a matter of getting it done, right, Erik? But I'm so happy to reconnect with you. How have you been?
We're doing great. We've just gotten back a few weeks ago from a trip in the American West. I drove more miles than I think I ever did in my life in one 3-week stretch. I had a great time with family, seeing national parks and connecting with home churches, supporting churches. But we're glad to be back here in the full swing of Christmas activity and outreach. In fact, this evening we're going to be going out in the streets in the sunny DR to do some Christmas caroling. So there's nothing that says Christmas like Christmas caroling with underneath a palm tree.
Awesome. Oh, you got it. There's nothing. We just did a video for a church, requested that we do a video with our family answering 3 questions. One of the question was, how does your country celebrate Christmas? We're in a 98% Muslim country, so our answer was very simple. We don't. Anyways, it was quite humorous. We'll probably share it after the church shows it to their church. We'll share it on our Facebook, and so you'll find that online somewhere. But yeah, it's a different experience, and I think Julie and I sat down and we did a podcast a couple of years ago talking about Christmas and our experience with living overseas. You learn to make it what you can, despite being a little separated from the traditions that you grew up with. And I think one thing I do miss, and our family agrees, is the snow. You know, we have sand. We make
Yeah,
sand angels. We don't do snow angels.
exactly. No, in fact, this year we have never done it this way yet. We have a lot of Christmas traditions in our church that have become special, and they're usually very much outreach oriented, but still a lot of fun.
Right.
Like I said, today we're going to go Christmas caroling, and they have a special kind of ginger tea they like at Christmas time. So when we're done passing out the flyers and singing at the homes, we'll come back and the church has some of that ginger tea and some of their crackers or cookies. They call them cookies; they're awful to me, but they enjoy them. And
Yeah.
but our kids, I told them this year, I said, hey, we should start a new tradition when on the 26th of December, when everyone's kind of still waking up late, we should go to the beach for that day and just have fun, and the beaches
Yeah.
will basically be empty. And our kids are like, yeah, let's go do that. So we'll see if we start that new tradition. But another thing, Josh, we're going to be celebrating some anniversaries today. But one thing is we've just celebrated our podcast anniversary, 4 years. So if you look at like a
Oh, that's
missionary, we're
right.
ready for a furlough. I think we've taken a lot of furloughs already from the podcast, but 4 years is hard to believe. But there's an even more important anniversary, and it's not the anniversary that Holly and I are going to celebrate next week, which is actually 20 years of marriage. Before Holly and I got married, in fact, a week and a half before we got married, we were down in Chattanooga, Tennessee at the December candidate school at BIMI. And there I met Josh and Julie Mead for the first time. And so this past week, Josh, we celebrated 20 years, you and I, our families, being missionaries with BIMI. What have you done to celebrate, Josh?
20 years of serving with BIMI officially as missionaries. That's quite a milestone. And for celebrating, I've been eating a lot of cookies, but that's more Christmas cookies. Other than that, I've been, just reminiscing of over the years, thinking a lot about those early days, going through some older pictures. In fact, we're going to make a post later talking about some of the, early memories. And I'm telling you, I went back and looked at some of the pictures when we were there at the BIMI headquarters, and we're just kids. I mean, I was fresh out of Bible college myself. I think I was maybe 18 or 19 years old at that time. I was really young either way, but it was
Little, little,
a little old, I guess
not
a
much.
little older. Not much though. I mean, maybe what 22, 23 years old. So it's yeah, it's hard to believe just how in 20 years all that the Lord has done and all of the experiences he's allowed both of our families to experience. And I think about how we kind of started in the same exact position. We went to the same, candidate school. We went the next summer to finish out candidate school. We were in a lot of the same missions conferences, and then we ended about the same time, left for language school, and just to see how what God has done in the last 20 years, it has been pretty incredible.
Yeah, so I got a list of questions I'm going to ask you, and then I'll just piggyback on them. But it is
Yeah,
true. Like when we first met each other, that kind of started for the next year and a half, a really close relationship that we not only, like you said, went to candidate school. You and I think we spent a lot of time together doing a church planning conference, just you and I. We did a lot of conferences together, and our last service was at your home church. We were staying in your house, and so
yeah,
we
yeah,
did vacations together. We really spent a lot of time together. And then we had this long stretch where we didn't get to see each other.
right.
But that's what's neat about friendship. And so my question is, this is a funny question because I'm going to give you my answer in a minute. What was your first impression of Holly and me, or specifically me, I guess, as missionary, future missionary?
Well, my first impression was
Be honest.
this guy is he's getting all the attention of the directors because they were obsessed with your story of you and Holly. It was an incredible story how the Lord put you two together, and it was like this big drama, and not in a negative way, but like an amazing drama love story. And you guys were getting all the attention. I thought, who is this guy that everybody's talking about here? And so, but we immediately became just good friends. Several of us during that week, we all just we're in that same generation, and several of us. I love what missions does. It brings together men and women of such different, diverse backgrounds, different Bible colleges, different life experiences, different states, all of that. And because of your common calling to go into the foreign mission field, you right away just find this brotherhood there. And so when I first met you, I was enamored by your story as well and rooting for you. And, it was an exciting story to hear how God was putting you and Holly together. And then I could tell this is definitely a guy who's well organized and a lot better organized than I am. I still to this day, I was telling Julie the other day, I'm still just, I'm chaotic with the way I do things, but it's how I get things done. And I've always appreciated just, you've always been very, very organized in your approach and your method of how you approach ministry. You're very structured, and I've learned a lot just watching you and your ministry developed. In fact, when we would host teams, I would go back and listen to some of the advice you gave on our podcast, talking about hosting teams and things you did. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed getting to know you, and that was the beginning of a great friendship. Now, Julie and I came in, we were just young. I mean, we were, we were married though. You guys weren't married yet.
No, we actually had a week and a half before we got married, which was a very long drive back and forth from Chattanooga.
Yeah.
Um, but my first impression of Josh was a great one because he was very young, that was obvious, but he was very adventurous. He's very, very funny, still is very funny. And I was very much drawn to that. I love the humor. I like, you know, it was very obvious he was going to go to a very difficult mission field. And I knew right away you couldn't be a stodgy person. You couldn't be a boring person. You'd have to be able to laugh at life. And I really enjoyed that. We laughed a lot and had good times. I could tell Josh was very much outside of the box thinker. Wasn't stuck in like this has got to be the way it is. That's how I like to think. And so instantly, I just felt like really drawn to them. And we enjoyed so many conversations over there. We'd call each other a lot of times after we've been different places to encourage each other. And I just found the relationship encouraging. Julie, I never got to know anyone specifically from Canada, so that was like a new experience for me. And I could tell Julie in the beginning wasn't it's all new to her, and there was very much unknown, and not in a bad way, but there was some maybe fear and trepidation, but confidence in the Lord and confidence in her husband's calling and willingness to do whatever. And over the years, to see her, you know, not only conquer that, but to thrive in that has been really encouraging as a friend from afar. To know that she would love to stay home in her hometown with her mom and her kids, their family, and but yet at the same time to love the Lord even more to go do that. I think that's also an aspect of missions that is always encouraging to another missionary. And so we really enjoyed our seasons of life. I remember even when, as we both were kind of the same stage of life, praying for having kids at the same time. And I remember when we had our first, we had a miscarriage, and you guys were very encouraging at the time, and even telling your pastor who sent us very encouraging notes. So there's some really strong ties that started really early on. And so uh, transition to the next question here. This is kind of more mechanical. It doesn't have to be long, but there are some guys who might be listening who are considering missions, Josh, and we've been now with BIMI 20 years. What are some of the key reasons you decided to partner with BIMI, and how well have those reasons held up for you over time?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, this popped into my mind as you were describing Julie, and you accurately described that experience. She was filled with a lot of intrepidation, just not fear of missions, but fear of just, having the right questions. She didn't grow up answers to the questions and things like that. And I thought I was, as you mentioned that, I was thinking about just 20 years of her faithfully serving the Lord and just being determined and overcoming various obstacles, even when we had a few leaders tell her straight to her face, "You're not going to make it as a missionary." And I don't think it was appropriate for these guys to say that, but they did. And I think this thought came into my mind, Erik, and I jot this down. I think that longevity, what's necessary for longevity, is not being in love with missions, but knowing that God loves his missionaries and God is faithful to his missionaries. Because that love for missions, I don't know how many years it took until you weren't so much in love with missions because it's not easy all the time. But God is always faithful. He loves his missionaries. He loves the people you're reaching more than you ever will. And as long as he'll be faithful to you if you be faithful to him. And transitioning into the BIMI choice, that's a big part of it. The men who lead at BIMI are men who have been missionaries, men who have been faithful in the work of missions, men who love missions, but more than that, when you're around the men and women at BIMI in leadership, they love the Lord and they love missionaries, and it's sincere and it's real. And there's a brotherhood there. Now, why did I choose BIMI? My pastor chose it for me. So when I and I made the
Yeah, I
choice,
understand.
but the way it worked for me, the major decisions in my life were just kind of, I never questioned those huge decisions. It just, this is what I'm doing. So when I knew God was calling me to be a missionary, I knew I was going to Africa. We just picked a country out of a hat and chose to come here. When I went to Bible college in Canada, I asked my pastor when I was 15, "What college do you recommend for missions?" And he said, "Faithway in Canada." I said, "Well, that's where I'm going." So I just made those decisions came easy. And I think it was the way God has hardwired me to just be confident in decision making, but also to be cautious in some. But when you work in a country like Senegal, you just need to know that God is going to direct you, and you make sure you get wise counsel, and then you just move forward. And I will say, like, as I'm talking about maybe confidence and decision making, the first time that we made a decision that went against what some of our leadership was recommending was where we went to language school. So that was the first time, a major decision. I usually just said BIMI. Yeah, I'll go with BIMI. I mean, that's who the missionary's been praying that a missionary would come and work with them, and he's BIMI. My pastor is on the board of BIMI. I mean, this just made sense. But then when we chose language school, pretty much everybody on that was in our sphere of influence was pushing us to go to France. And I think I shared this already in a previous podcast, but it ended up being the right decision. And it was a way for God to show us that sometimes you have to follow what you know God is leading you to do, even when your leadership around you might have different advice. And sometimes you got to make those decisions that, and what I appreciate, so this does tie into why I love BIMI, is when we made that final decision, they supported us. They said, okay, we'll get behind you and we'll support you if this is what you believe God is leading you to do. And I'll tell you, I've interviewed other missionaries with other mission boards with different denominations, and they're very limited in what they feel the liberty that they can engage in their work. Whereas maybe sometimes as independent Baptists, we have a little bit too much liberty on the field, and I'm not against that. There needs to be accountability for sure, but I think that we would not be where we are today if we did not have a leadership at BIMI, directors from Ron Bragg to Erik Bowman today, all the way from Don Sisk, who is very supportive, to David Schneider, who's the current leader, president BIMI. They're just behind the missionary. They support you and what God is leading you to do, and I love that and appreciate that about this mission. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a very similar story. Our pastor is also was on the board and still on the board, and his son was a missionary, was with BIMI. But most importantly, as I try to explain to people, those are all signs of affirmation. Really, BIMI believed like we did, and they
Right.
saw missions like we did. And I can't think of a time where I've been disappointed with BIMI. I mean, they're a big organization. There might be things if you would do one thing one way or another, that's okay. But as the whole, I couldn't be more pleased with BIMI. I'm proud to be a partner with BIMI. And as you mentioned, it starts with the leadership. If you want to go back and listen to the podcast with Dr. Godfrey, you'll see, the kind of leaders that are who've been tried and tested over the years. And we're very proud to be with them. And so that was a little more for a plea for those considered BIMI. We would encourage you to consider BIMI. But considering our 20 years, Josh, looking back over the last 20 years of church planning work overseas, what moments or experiences might stand out as some of your more meaningful or memorable? And it could be a couple, maybe fast ones, or just, even a kind of an overview.
Yeah, sure. There's there's so many memories that it even comes to a point where you sometimes forget like
Hmm.
oh, what memories there are. And that's why I appreciate Facebook and things like that, because it just the other day a memory popped up 8 years ago. This time 8 years ago, I was in northern Gambia visiting a village of the first guy we led to Christ. And we're actually going back in January to Gambia, and we're doing a tour of his village and several surrounding villages to share the gospel. We're going to show the Jesus film in their language, and then we're going to take some time to do some questions and answers and be sharing the gospel. And so those are the things that during church planning, those relationships that you develop and engage with, the people that you get to partner with and work with, and then just to see the development and growth. I think what I love the most and what's most meaningful to me in the work of missions is being a part of something that it is God's work, but on a certain human level, the work would not be what it is as it is in the form it is unless we had surrendered and come to be involved in this. And by the grace of God, he plugged us into what he is going to do and what he is doing. He doesn't need us to do this work, but that we get to be privileged enough that we can look around and say, look what the Lord did. And I got to be a part of that. And maybe some of what's here would never have been accomplished except that I was able to plug into what God was doing. So I'm being very careful with my words because
Yeah.
God gets all the glory here, and he'll accomplish his will, and he's the one who's leading in missions. But I think it's just the work of missions I heard a guy say one time, and I actually posted it online, and I think a pastor friend of mine was a little offended by it. I didn't, it wasn't meant to offend, but it was a clip where a missionary stated, he said, I would rather go to a country where I know something to this effect, go to a country where I know they might never hear the gospel except that I'm here sharing the gospel. I'd rather do that and maybe only see a handful of people saved than reach thousands of people that don't need me. And what he meant by that was there's 100 pastors in your city, there's 100 churches, and and so it's not, there's a need everywhere, and what God has called you to do you need to follow, whether it's pastoring or mission work. But I will say there's something incredible about going to a barren field and watching how God can take the seed of the gospel, and when you plant it, he does a marvelous work. And when we look around 20 years later from where we began to where we are now, the vision he gave us early on, how it developed over time, where it's still, where it's beginning to develop even in the future, what plans God has. It's an incredible thing, and it's humbling to be a part of that. And so I can't really nail down any specific memories because
Sure.
every stage has such wonderful memories. You know, furlough, you can think of so many memories of connecting with churches and pastors and meeting new people. And then on the field, just memorable moments of God working in major ways. And so, what about you? What are, what's been meaningful to you about the memory of the work you've been involved in for 20 years?
So, like you, as I reflect on the breadth of 20 years, I think in the beginning, the first people getting saved, the first baptisms, the first disciples, the first services, the first buildings, all those first, they were very special, and they always have been. But I think as the time goes by, I'm not as it doesn't get me as excited about a big day with lots of people being at church as much as seeing not only people saved, that is never gets old, but to see people have spiritual victories, to see people, that are dealing with the situation, and through whether it's the preaching of God's word that we've been able to be a part of, the teaching, but mostly just maybe even just setting the example, to see them have victories and grow in their faith and grow in their family. I think I still get more excited about that than anything. And then also new works like you're talking about. Lord willing, the end of next month, we're going to be launching out our fourth church. Like as I mentioned before, it's a
Yeah.
granddaughter church. It doesn't really work that way, but it is. And I'm very excited. Never not excited about that. But just seeing people saved, grow in the Lord. And then you mentioned this in a way, and I think I do understand that. I oftentimes will be at a church activity and it's bustling with people. And I just thank the Lord that I got to be a channel or a way for these people sometimes not only to know the Lord. In some cases, they actually knew the Lord, but they needed a place to grow, and they needed other believers to encourage them. And there's an exciting thing. It's not that I did it, but God let me come here. And because
Mhm.
we were here and we were the central place of worship, these people have met each other and they've encouraged
That's right.
people and they've gotten saved. And this person invited this person. And that makes me excited that, wow, I'm glad we're here. And I think we try to clue that into our kids. And I think our kids, as young as they are, I think have understood that. It's not that mom and dad did any of this, but because mom and dad were here, God got to work, and we could see the future as being, something bright and exciting because, we came in and we gave up some things. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that is something that after 20 years I'm very excited about. But
Mhm.
so there's always two sides to a coin, Josh. So there's one side where we're encouraged by things are meant meaningful, well, and not that it be negative, but we all understand there's a challenging aspect to our missionary work. What would you say have been some of the challenging aspects of serving as a missionary overseas the last 20 years?
To be honest with you, I would have to say, and maybe I'm trying to think back if we ever had an episode. I know we've talked about challenges on episodes in the past, but to be honest with you, I think the biggest challenge on the mission field for us that we've experienced, and I think this is true of many missionaries, without going into a lot of details, is just interpersonal relationships with other missionaries. And that'd be for a whole nother podcast to discuss. But it can be, there can be unique challenges presented, and then there's unique challenges presented with working with national leadership. There's great blessing in partnering with national leadership, but it's a cross cultural context. It's hard enough to be a leader of people in your own peer group, your own generation, your own culture. But then when you're entering into cross cultural leadership, it takes it's a whole nother game. And even to this day, 20 years of serving on the mission field, we have a lot of responsibilities with a couple church plants and mission work that are here, and just working with leadership, mentoring, and then when bumps in the road come, and just recently we're dealing with an issue in some leadership, nothing major, but it's just, I appreciate how the Lord gives you the right partner, specifically my wife. I'm the type of guy who I I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, whereas my wife sees things more black and white, and I see things as more gray. And we make a great balance for each other, because when something needs to be black and white and I want to treat it like it's maybe not that big a deal, she makes sure, no, this is a big deal. And so we've learned over the years I've learned, especially me, to listen to her when she has a gut feeling about something. Okay, I don't see it yet, but I need to take this into consideration. And there was a thing that happened recently with leadership here, and she was right. And so I didn't want it to be true, but it ended up that what she predicted would happen happened. And like I said, it's not a big deal, but I think that the most challenging is when conflict arises with interpersonal relationship, or you have to engage with problem solving cross culturally, and it's not necessarily something that's bad. It's just challenging because you're coming at it with a different perspective as an American. You're coming at it with, already they have a different perspective of you. And so I would say that's the biggest challenge, are those interpersonal relationships. But that's kind of universal. I think for the missionary, though, it just takes it up a notch because it's all cross cultural.
Yeah, there's a lot we could talk about here, and we've talked about. I had two things written down, and one of them kind of goes without saying. I think the idea of missing family back home, events, Christmas,
Sure.
birthdays, weddings, funerals, things like that, and we've talked about that extensively. So I wanted to be more specific, and you brought up one that I hadn't thought of, the interpersonal relationships, and we've dealt with that as well. But I think for me, just probably because this last week I've had to deal with a missionary who was here many years, and still trying to help them resolve a situation they left behind, a problem. I think one of the most discouraging aspects has been watching fellow missionaries not only leave the field, because sometimes they need to, but also to go through the pain of seeing some broken marriages. We've actually, for whatever reason, seen a lot in the last 10, 15 years
Hmm.
of missionaries not only leave the field, but their marriages dissolve. And, that does reinforce and encourage us to the importance of guarding our own marriage and family. And I never try to like be depressed about it, but by there we go by the grace of God. And so I think that has been a challenge to work alongside or fight for the Lord with these fellow workers, and then to see them kind of fall by the wayside can be difficult. But that happens in ministry. That happens, and you just have to be understanding you're made of the same thing as those people are, and you're not better than they are, and you need to strengthen your marriage and your family, and so that is something that happens, and Paul experienced that. We see that in Scripture, people who fell by the wayside, and we saw people who were restored, like John Mark, and so. I think there's an encouragement from the Scripture from that. But there's also a reality of that's why it's mentioned in Scripture, and is a challenging aspect. I mean, mission field work can be very difficult, and it certainly can be taxing on your life and your family's life, and that's why it's important to go through that. Now, that's come some deep stuff, and we're running out of time a little bit here, so I want to blaze through these last ones. Can you share with us a funny or maybe unique memory or moment, that something that happened but kind of could only happen on your mission field. That kind of gives it a little bit more spice to it, Josh.
There's a lot of stories we could share. I think my mind immediately went back to the first year we were here, and it was coming toward the cool season. So we were going to put up our pool. I was going to empty it out and, winterize it, even though winter here is like 60 degrees, but that's cold. And I decided I'm going to let all the neighbor kids come over and swim, all the neighbor boys. And there's 100 kids in a neighborhood. So I went over and I thought, well, I told Julie, go make some treats and we'll have the neighbor boys come over and play with Tristan and they can all swim right before I shut the pool down. Now we had not had anybody over to swim yet. And
Mm.
so I went to the back gate, opened the door. There's a little kid standing there. And I said, hey, you guys want to come swimming? Go get all your friends and you guys can swim. And he just sat there and I said, oh, did he understand what I said? And so I said it again in Wolof. And then he turned and just at the top of his voice said, the white guy opened his door. Come on, we can go swim. And I mean, before I could register what was happening, kids were coming from every corner. They're coming around the street corner. They're jumping over walls
Oh
and
my
they are
goodness.
making a beeline to our gate. And so they all come rushing in, probably 20 kids right off the bat run in. And I'm trying to get the door shut, and I look down the road, and here comes another wave of kids coming. So I thought, oh, I can't have this many kids. So I just get the door locked, and I turn around, and well, it was the first time I realized living here that when boys go swimming at the local water hole, they disrobe everything. And so I turn, and here they are
Uh,
diving in with nothing. And I said,
oh,
no, you can't. What's going on? And just about that time, I'm running over. You got to keep some clothes on. And my wife comes around the corner with some cookies and she goes, ah, she screams. She said, Josh, they don't have clothes on. I said, I know. She said, you know. I said, no, I didn't tell. Like, no. And at the same time, I look over at my gate and it's buckling in. They're gonna burst through the door. And finally, they do. I'm trying to get these kids some clothes on. Another 20 kids burst through the door. And in between all of that, now I'm holding a camera because I was going to document this day of ministry and helping our neighbor. I'm like, forget it, I can't take pictures now. But while I'm standing there in the chaos, an older kid climbed on top of our wall and he yells out, hey, he's taking pictures of everybody to sell to National Geographic. And I said, what? No, no, I'm not. Anyways, it was a mess.
oh
So
my,
that was, I got
that's
everybody out of the
commendable.
pool. I said, get out, get out. So I learned my
That
lesson.
is well. I think I have too many funny ones that I can't ever remember all the details. But I would say it's funny that you're talking about swimming because I have one comes to mind as well. Where we had a group of boys that was a camp and we were swimming. And I noticed this one kid had goggles. He was about 20 feet away, and he put the goggles on and you see him go down. He's down for like 1 second. He jumps back up and the water's coming out of it. I'm like, does he not know how to wear goggles? What's going on? So I go over there and it's not swimming goggles. It's like protective goggles for like cutting, wood.
Oh.
And he doesn't understand that these goggles are not covering his eyes. And it was so funny. It just made me laugh. Like, you know, you see movies and it's like, well, you got to put these goggles on. You're going to go underneath the water. It
Yeah,
just made me
yeah,
laugh. It had nothing to do with Dominican, other than just
yeah, yeah.
a Dominican boy did it. It made me laugh to this day. Whenever we go swimming, I think of that boy. And well, we're gonna try to wrap this up quickly. We have about 4 minutes left, and this is a big question to ask. But Josh, if God were to bless you with another 20 years on your mission field, what would you love to see Him do in your life in your ministry?
Very simply, I'd love to see the Lord take the model of church planting that we've established, the model of how to approach church planting in a predominantly Muslim country, the model of partnership between me, the Western missionary, and Malik, our national pastor, and then the model of using media to engage Muslims and then use that to start Bible studies and meet people in person. Take this model that we've formulated and God has blessed and just see it all throughout North Africa become a model that churches and missionaries can adapt. And then we can help train men and women to start churches across Senegal, Gambia, and other parts of North Africa. And so I'd love to just be a part of the expansion of this ministry. Yeah.
Amen. Well, I reiterate that. I like to see our churches spiritually strong, growing. We have the hopes in the next 5, 10, 15 years of developing this Christian camp where we want to meet the evangelistic needs of our town, but also meet the discipleship needs of our country. We feel like God's really opening a lot of doors for us. So I'd love to see that the next 20 years of ministry. I want to see all my kids serving the Lord one way or another. Some have expressed possibilities to come back here, but whether it's here or somewhere else, just that we're serving the Lord. And then most of all, I just want Holly and I to be more in love than we are today. And next week we're going to celebrate 20 years, and it doesn't really matter as much the ministry
Congratulations.
stuff if we're not going forward together as a couple loving the Lord. So those are all the things that I'm praying for. And if He gives us 20 more years, I'd be the happiest guy. You never know what God's got in store, but man, Josh, it's been an exciting 20 years. And
Yes.
I'm glad to say that you're my friend, and I'm glad to say that excited about what you're doing. I prayed for you all the whole time you were over at Gambia, and look forward to seeing the Lord has for the next one. So this is Erik Johnson from the sunny DR, thanking you for being with us, celebrating with us. Like, subscribe, share this podcast to YouTube or all other platforms you get it audio. Josh, why don't you finish us off up today?
Thanks so much for tuning in. And Erik, we've got a few questions that were sent in recently, and we're going to try to get to those. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please email us at missionaryperspectivepodcast@gmail.com, and we will try our best to cover those topics. But we just appreciate everyone who tunes in and listens and then interacts with our content. We started doing this, Erik, as an excuse for you and I to connect. And we're grateful if it's a blessing to anybody beside our moms who listen to us. Love you, Mom. So Merry Christmas to everyone who's listening. And we will be back soon.
Bye bye. Take care.
God bless.